With the help of Hashem, we are learning Beitzah Daf Chav Beis. We left off on Daf Chav Beis, Amud Aleph, 7 lines from the top of the Amud. We are referring back to the Mishnah on Daf Chav Aleph, Amud Beis, where Rabban Gamliel was machmir beyond the letter of the law in 3 areas, like Beis Shammai, and one of them is concerning hatmana, insulating. The topic that we are discussing is insulating even only hot water on Yom Tov. Don't forget that on Yom Tov you can actually cook the water for Yom Tov, but insulating hot water on Yom Tov for Shabbos, according to Beis Shammai, and now Rabban Gamliel, who's machmir, like Beis Shammai, holds that one may not do so. And we're going to come back. We're going to review the issue of what's the issue. Was there an Eid of Tafshilin? Was there not an Eid of Tafshilin? But we're going to further clarify, give other approaches to Shitas Rabban Gamliel. We're going to speak about the concept, the rule of Ein Binyan the Stira Bekalim. In other words, one of the Aves Malachis is building Binyan, and we have this Shita, and that is that when it comes to movable items, when it comes to Kalim, there is no such a thing as Binyan or Stira, making, building, or dismantling Kalim. Actually, like we spoke out when we learned Masechta Shabbos, there's a very important machlekes between Rashi and Tosfos. The Ramban also sides with Tosfos. Whether, like Rashi, there is never an issue with building when it comes to utensils, or Kishitas Tosfos, Kishitas Ramban that will speak out. It's not so simple. Making something from scratch, building a box, is considered binyan. We are only referring to an item like a menorah that was already built. It was built out of different parts, and then it fell apart, and you are now reassembling it. Only here do we apply the rule of ein binyan or stira bekalim, as we'll learn in the sugya. We're going to introduce for the first time a very important machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim concerning doing work on Yom Tov, not for food. Everyone agrees. The pasuk says that you are allowed to do whatever you need to do to make the actual food. What about something that's going to fall in the category of preliminary food preparation? Machshirei oichel nefesh, that is going to be subject to a machlokes tanoim. We're going to speak about medications on Yom Tov. We all know that on Shabbos, on a rabbinic level, one is not allowed to take medications because the sages were afraid that we're going to end up grinding herbs, which is a violation, a biblical violation. That was the common way for people to take medicines. It was basically herb or plant-based, and you would have to grind them to make them ready to be taken as a medication. Question is, do we have such a takana on Yom Tov or not? We will see again in this Masechta that we treat the second day of Yom Tov more lenient than the first day, and the question will be regarding the second day, Rosh Hashanah. The consensus we had before is that Rosh Hashanah is viewed like one long day, but if you remember, we had the sheet of the Nardois, and here we'll have again another very lenient opinion that will treat the second day Rosh Hashanah like a second day Yom Tov in this context and being lenient. Now we're going to explain the third chumrah that we had in the Mishnah, and that is that Rabbi Gamliel was machmir beyond the letter of the law not to bake thick breads on Yom Tov. What was that all about? Yes, wafers, thin breads, yeah. Thick breads, no. We're going to have a new understanding in our Gemara, and God willing, if I'll remember, I'll share how the Yerushalmi explains this final din of the Mishnah. Now, on Daf Chav Beis Amud Beis, to continue on this topic, we're going to go to the other extreme, that there were other areas in where Rabban Gamliel ruled leniently in a machlokes. We're going to speak about placing incense on burning coals. People used to perfume their clothing. People used to make sure that the environment has a pleasant fragrance. And the problem of putting incense on coals is double. Number one is that you are extinguishing the coals a little bit when you put coal incense on it. And you are also igniting, you are kindling the incense itself. So you have both mavir and you have both kindling and you have extinguishing. We will see why perhaps you could do it, why perhaps you cannot do it. Similarly, people sometimes used to smoke fruits on Yom Tov, same concept. they would expose fruits to burning incense. And here again, we're gonna see whether that is permitted, whether that's not permitted. B'chlal, many melachas for Yom Tov, first of all, is permitted, food related. Then we go beyond by saying that mitoich shechutra v'tzorich oichel nefesh, since you can do that activity for food related, for food, you can do it even for not food. But we already introduced the concept that we are only permitted to do things on Yom Tov, which is normally a violation of an Av, if it's something that's shava l'chol nefesh, if it's something that's common, at least for most people. So that's going to touch whether most people would put incense and allow their clothing, their garments to absorb some sort of good smell. Do people do that when it comes to fruits? Is it shava l'chol nefesh? Is it only done by the wealthy? Perhaps certain activities that are only done for the wealthy is called shava l'chol nefesh, because if a poor person would be able to afford it, he also would do it. And at the end, we're going to learn about a rabbinic problem called moilad recha. Moilad recha means creating something new. Don't confuse creating something new with noilad. Noilad is what we learned in the first half of this Masechta about something that was just born. Something that was just born, that wasn't here prior to Shabbos or prior to Yom Tov, is going to be muktzah on a very heavy level because it wasn't prepared prior to Shabbos or Yom Tov to be used. That's called noilad. What we will learn today is something called moilad. Moilad means, again, doing something that almost is a new creation. So it's like a malacha. You're making something that did not exist before. We're going to relate this to creating, putting incense on coals or on earthenware, and a good fragrance goes into the earthenware. That's considered perhaps moilad, and therefore it will be prohibited rabbinically, and a lot more. Again, let's start on Avchav Beis Amud Aleph for 7 lines from the top of the Amid. Rabban Gamliel did not allow for someone to insulate hot water on Yom Tov for Shabbos. B'chlal, insulating is something that if you are not insulating an item, even on Shabbos, in ashes or in something that you might actually make into a larger fire, insulating to begin with is only rabbinically prohibited. Insulating something on Shabbos, even though it's not adding heat. On Yom Tov, you can actually cook, bake, but insulating something on Yom Tov for Shabbos is asur. And the Gemara wanted to understand, why should it be asur? Did you make an Eid of Tafshilin? If you made an Eid of Tafshilin, then you should be allowed to do whatever you would like. So the first approach the Gemara had, that was a Rabbah from Abinah Rav Huna. Rav Huna says that our Mishnah is dafka speaking about a case where one forgot to make an Eid of Tafshilin. If you forgot to make an Eid of Tafshilin, Beis Hillel actually holds a new svara that we never knew before, that a minimum amount of food preparation is allowed, according to Beis Hillel, even though you made no Eid of Tafshilin, insulating some hot water on Yom Tov for Shabbos will be permitted. It's Beis Shammai that's machmer. But they're machmer because you did not make an Eid of Tafshilin. And here, Rabban Gamliel, beyond the letter of the law, followed that ruling in his household. Rava Amar, 7 lines from the top in the beginning of the line. La'olam, the case of the Mishnah was shehiniach. You did leave an Eid of Tafshilin. Now, if you left an Eid of Tafshilin, why would insulating be prohibited? Shani hatmane, insulation is different than any other food preparation. It's clear that you're doing it for Shabbos. All of the other foods that you make on Yom Tov for Shabbos, let's begin with the svara of Rabbah that we spoke out. You can only make it when after the food is ready, there is still enough time that if guests will come to your house, you'll have what to feed them. In other words, when you make food on Yom Tov, it's not clear that you are making it for Shabbos, even though you're making a large amount, because still people, you can argue that you're having a nice fabrengen Yom Tov towards the end of Yom Tov, Friday afternoon. But insulating, the whole reason why you put something in an item that insulates is because you want it to maintain its heat for a longer amount of time. It's clear you're doing it for Shabbos. Wow. So therefore, Hatmana is not covered by the Eid of Tafshilin. So holds Rava, and Abaya strongly disagrees with that. Esvei Abaya, I'm going to quote for you a Beitzah, Hananya Omer, Beishamai Omerim, Beishamai, who introduces the concept. And we partially follow this din of Beishamai. And that is that if you want to bake, you have to have an Eid of Tafshilin from a baked item. If you want to cook, you have to have an eruv tafshilin from a cooked item. Really, Beis Shammai says 2 cooked items. But Beis Shammai was the one that says that you want to cover a certain type of food, you have to make an eruv with that type of food. Ein oifen elam kein eruv bepas. Ve'ein mafshir mevashlin elam kein eruv betafshil. Ve'ein toimnin, he speaks about hatmana, and he's allowing hatmana. Ve'ein toimnin, you can only insulate from Yom Tov to Shabbos. Elam kein hoyolei chamim tumunum erev Yom Tov, only if you made hatmana from before Yom Tov. So what do we see clearly? Says the Gemara, says Abaya asks, challenging Rava, but if you did insulate something from before for Yom Tov, then Miya Ovid, you are allowed to continue to insulate on Yom Tov for Shabbos. Even though if you're trying to tell me that Hatmana is never covered by eruv tafshilin, no. Even though it's clear, why are you insulating? Because you want to save it for a later time, meaning from Yom Tov for Shabbos. The Shabbos Kavit. And therefore, Abaya doesn't completely reject Rava. Abaya likes this approach that our Mishnah's case of Rabban Gamliel not doing Hatmana, even not on hot water, on Yom Tov for Shabbos, is going to be a case where there was a general eruv tafshilin, but Abaya going she'eruv lezev or eruv lezev. That the chumra is that the case was that the person had a baked bread, the person had a cooked piece of fish, which is exactly what we do. You did afiyah, you did bishul in your eruv. What did you not do? You did not insulate anything. Now, according to Beis Hillel, you're good. The chumra here is that Rabban Gamliel was machmer like this Chananya, according to Beis Shammai, that if you want to make a certain type of food for Shabbos, you needed to have that type included in the eruv. So even though you made an eruv of afiyah and of bishul, if you didn't make hatmana, Rabban Gamliel was machmer, and he would not allow hatmana. Gewaldig. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam v'sha'ar kol nivud. The
Which
second,
daf?
Daf Chav Beis, and we are now by the 2 dots, around probably 15 lines from the top of the Amid, something like that. The second chumrah of Rabban Gamliel was ve'ein zoikvin es hamenorim. If there was a candlestick that needs to be straightened out, that's what the word zoikif means, you may not do it. Now, what's the case? Fragt die Gemara, my ka'avid. In other words, you have to explain what av are we touching on? What's the problem for which we say that he was machmer? What do you mean it's straightened out? Did you have a candlestick that just fell on the side? Of course you can pick it up. Candlesticks are not muktzah on Yom Tov. Amar Rav Chinana bar Bisna tarhache b'menoira shel chuliyos askinim. Guys, we had this topic when we learned Shabbos. We're speaking about a candlestick that's comprised out of different parts. All right, Kavan's picture is a very not attractive candlestick, but it works. You have different parts, and it was made, and it somehow got disassembled. Question is, can you reassemble this on Yom Tov? What would be the issue? The mechzek kaboina, because it looks like you're building, and Beis Shammai holds yesh binyan b'kelim. Even if something is not affixed in the ground, even if it's only a movable, if it's a keli, that also may not be built. Beis Hillel savri ein binyan b'kelim ve'ein stira b'kelim, which is why if you would not be machmir, you would allow someone to reassemble this type of candlestick. Now, Rashi holds, and we spoke this out on Shabbos, that mamish ein binyan b'kelim. Even according to Rashi, we learned about making a barrel. There are certain times that making from scratch a keli would be problematic, even Rashi, because of MERCAVA patish. But let's come back to binyan, never binyan. Tosfos over here and the Ramban, they say that no. When you have an item that was already made, like this menorah, this candlestick, it was already made once. Now it became disassembled. And not only it became disassembled, you don't even need a professional to reassemble it. Any person can do it. Here is where we say, ein binyan b'kelim. And Beis Shammai is still machmer. But according to Tosfos and according to the Ramban, and so is brought down even in Shulchan Aruch, but to make something from scratch is problematic. You understand? That's a big difference. Making something from scratch versus not. Okay, let's go weiter. Ula ikla devei Rav Yehuda. Ula once visited the household of Rav Yehuda. Kom Shamoel, that's Ula's attendant, stood up, and Zakavla Lishraga, what happened is that there was such a candlestick that collapsed, and he straightened it out. So Eisvei Rav Yehuda Ula, it says in Abraisa, Hanoisen Shemen B'ner. Oh, let me explain. Rashi says like this. But it wasn't a disassembled candlestick. What happened there is that there was a candle on Yom Tov, and the oil was very low. So in order to make sure that the wick still is in the oil, they tilted it, and therefore when they tilted it, the wick had more oil in it, or more closer to the oil. And Ula's attendant, he stood it up. When he stood it up, he caused the fire to be put out. Because by standing it up, again, the oil was all the way in the bottom, the wick was like adhered or stuck to the side. It distanced the wick from the oil, and that act of standing it up is already connected to the problem of extinguishing fire on Yom Tov. That was the issue. So, how can your attendant do it? People thought that if your attendant does something, he does it with your consent. That was the premise of the question. It says, if you add oil in a candle holder, you're chayiv of maver, you're chayiv of kindling. If you remove it, you're chayiv because of MERCAVA. You are extinguishing. So by your attendant standing it up, again, he distanced the oil from the wick, causing the fire to be extinguished. Are you telling me that you allow extinguishing to be done on Yom Tov? So Amalei, to which Ula responded, Lavadatoi, what my attendant did was not with my knowledge, it was not with my consent. Just because he did it, it doesn't mean that I hold that it's permitted. Now we're going to take a pause for a moment, and we're going to learn the third Tosfos, which is so important. Because the Tosfos makes a very big difference between only causing something to be extinguished versus you actually extinguishing it. Gram kiboy, causality, causing means that there is a time distance between your action and its outcome. Now, how much time has to pass is a very important halachic discussion, how to apply in practicality this concept. But you should know that throughout the Torah, not only by Hilchas Shabbos, by Hilchas Mazikin, there is a concept of direct, and then there's a concept of you only causing. And when you only cause, you are certainly less responsible. So let's read inside the third Tosfos. Says Tosfos.
Rabbi, this was on Shabbos or on Yom Tov?
So what happened here was on Yom Tov. The Beitzah that he quoted was from Shabbos Tzemach, but we're going with the premise that kindling a fire from nothing is something that we may not do on Yom Tov, as we know, and extinguish it is also something that we may not do on Yom Tov. All right, to put something completely out. Look inside the Tosfos. Hamistapik memenu chayiv mishum MERCAVA. So Tosfos says, that if a person had a cup filled with oil, and you removed some of the oil, and when you remove that oil, nothing happened to the fire. But if you would have left the oil, let's say it would have burned for an hour, and now that you removed oil, it's going to burn for 45 minutes. In other words, you did not put it out now. You did something that will make the fire go out earlier. Tosfos says, the loyhava elagram kiboy. This is called you causing something to be extinguished. The gam kiboy be Yom Tov shari. Here you go, tzemach. Here's the difference. On Shabbos, causing something will be prohibited rabbinically, and causing something to be extinguished on Yom Tov is mutar. Mutar. That's Tosfos' challenge. So you can't quote from Shabbos if it's only gram, because that which is only Yosef Midrabanan on Shabbos is lachatchila mutar on Yom Tov. And he writes, so Shabbos nami ein chayiv, and Shabbos you're not chayiv, but Shabbos is aser, but you're not chayiv chatos. So what's the issue here? Elo Tosfos says, Hainu tamo, choyil de ba'ois l'shah, shu mestapek mimenu, mechabek tzas, umechasa oiroi, de lo yochel anurei kulahai. Tosfos says is that we're speaking about a scenario where when you remove the oil, you're moving the wick itself, just being practical. The fire didn't go out, but the fire got diminished a little bit while you remove the oil. That's very important. So the problem is not that since you removed oil, it's going to go out sooner than later. No, the problem is while you're removing it, you made the fire smaller. Making a fire smaller, even on Yom Tov, is also. Now, there's an exception, as we know, that if you're preparing food, and the only way to make sure the food won't get burned is by lowering the fire, not putting it out. That's something that we are allowed to do. People should be very careful not to do it in their homes, because there's no reason for you to need to lower a fire when you're cooking or whatever you're doing with the fire on Yom Tov. Move the pot away. But when you don't have such an option, that's one thing. But stam to make a fire lower is also asad on Yom Tov. And the point is that everything that happened over here, whether it was his attendant standing the candle up, that right away made the fire diminish, or right away it made the fire go out. It's very important to remember that. People, we mentioned, when many people would smoke, I'm talking about smoking, not smoking weed, which is maybe today shaval l'chol nefesh, tragically. I'm speaking about smoking, what I call smoking. And when people were allowed to smoke on Yom Tov, so you would finish smoking, you would put what would you do? You can't throw the cigarette, disgusting, and step on it and put it out, but they would put it in a place where it would go out, no problem. As long as you did not do something directly on Yom Tov, it's mutter. Good, let's go back over here. Amarav, another din, it's loaded with dinim. Kanba. Kanba means trimming a wick. Trimming a wick means that when you have a wick and the top of the wick is fabrent, is burnt, and there's a fire, but the fire there's a big piece of burnt wick in the fire. Sometimes you would trim the wick in the fire or above the fire. Says Rav that on Yom Tov is allowed because you're not doing anything. Here again, even though the fire will get bigger, which means the fire is going to eat up the wax quicker, that b'chlal is not a problem. Verstehst, on Yom Tov, even though the candle will go out sooner than later. That's gram. Next. Do we ever allow for someone to extinguish a fire in order to be allowed to have marital relations? As we learned to Nida, that the modest way of being together is in the dark. And since the Torah allows malachis, so we are making a correlation between the pleasure that a person has, it's called here davar acher, and eating. So if there is fire in the room, are you allowed to extinguish it? Can you say you're doing that act of a malacha on Yom Tiv, but for pleasure? And we're going to include that in Oichel Nefesh. Amaloi, but why, practically, you don't have to put it out. Find another way. Go to another room. If you don't have another room to go to, you can make a mechitza between you and the source of fire. It's interesting. No one is suggesting for you to remove the candle. Could be you can't. Could be you can't for some reason.
Rabbi,
yes.
Is this question predicated on us being allowed to extinguish fire for Eichel Nefesh? And therefore he's asking, what about for something else?
This is predicated on me viewing the act as Eichel Nefesh itself. The way I understand it, something that your whole body.
Don't we say we do not extinguish unless your food is burning, whatever, like you just said. So
but if your food is burning, if the only way you will be able to eat is by putting it out, theoretically, then you could put it out. So here you can't have relations, and there's no other option. What are you allowed to do? I make a mechitza. Ein loilas is mechitza. Okay, don't make a mechitza. Put something over the fire. Efshel lachapis all of us akeli. Invert the keli on it. Still, ein loy keli mai. Bottom line is, if there's no option, amaloi asur, you may not extinguish. Frag the Gemara Esvei on Abaye, right? Abaye said you can't extinguish it. So we challenge Abaye from the following Beitzah. It says, on Yom Tov, ein machaben es habakas kedei lachus oleh. If you have some sort of large block of wood that you don't need anymore, let's say it was in your fireplace, it's warmed the house. Now leave the wood there? No, the wood, I'll have no wood left. So if you are extinguishing this fire in order to save the wood, you have rachmanas on the wood, that is something that is not allowed. But if you don't want the house to become smoked up, or if you don't want the pot to get burnt, and the only solution is to remove that bakas, that log of wood, then you are allowed. In other words, you are allowed to extinguish for the betterment of a pot, or even if the entire environment is getting smoked up. So you can't live like that. So you are, how will this be different than extinguishing a fire if there's no other option in order to be able to have marital relations? So here we introduce the concept of machshirei oichel nefesh. In other words, there is a machlokes tanoim whether you can violate malachas an Yom Tov for a preliminary of oichel nefesh. Amalei hahi, this Beitzah that allows you, that's because the Beitzah follows Rebbe Yehuda. Rashi says that we're going to have the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda on Daf Chav Ches that writes that machshirei oichel nefesh, even only for preliminaries, you are allowed to break the Shabbos. And that's the pshat how Rabbi Yehuda expounds the word diei aseh lochem. Rashi is quoting later, l'chol tzorcheichem. And tzorcheichem will also include tashmish. However, we who paskin that you may not is because we don't paskin like the Rabbanon. And the big question, we'll learn about this on Daf Chav Ches. Whoa. We say mitoich. Like why don't we use mitoich? That's the big. We'll learn the sugya and daf chav ches. But we view the permit. You see, where we are accepting that the act of tashmish is like oichel nefesh. But what you are doing is something that you need to do before. In other words, it's not like making food. Making food is you're making the food. That's oichel nefesh. Here you're doing an activity in order for you to have the right conditions to be able to eat. Like the house is smoking up. Why can you extinguish the log? Because you can't eat in a smoking house. It's not eating, but you're doing something that will allow you to eat. Machlokes tanoim, and we paskin like the Rabbanon. Back inside the Gemara. No, it's back only the Rabbanon. Next question. Let me ask you another question. Can I extinguish a fire on Yom Tov? Guys, we know on Shabbos, obviously, if there is a person who might get killed in the fire, you have to extinguish the fire. But if you know that no life is at risk, it's a big statement. Today in the cities that we live in, one house is near the other. You can always say that, lives are in risk because the fire can, God forbid, jump from one house to the other. But when you live in a village, no one is around you. All the members in the house are outside the house. It's only about finances. On Shabbos, you may not put the fire out. We learned all the dinim. What are you allowed to say from the house? What are you not allowed to say from the house? What about on Yom Tov? So the Gemara clarifies the question. Hey, if there's a risk to life, then what can we violate? Even on Shabbos, you can put a fire out. The question is, Mishum ibud mamain. It's only about financial loss. And here, Rabba, right? The question was asked from Rabba, and Rabba responded, Aser. So Esvei, same problem. You can put out a fire so the house should not be smoky. Like you can't put out a fire to save the house itself. It doesn't make sense. If you're only saving the log for the log itself, that you can't do on Yom Tov. But if you can save your building from being filled with smoke, you can save your building from being burnt down. So here again, answers the Gemara. That Beitzah is following the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda that holds that included in the heter of oichel nefesh is even preliminary oichel nefesh. You're eating in the house. If you don't have a house, you're not going to eat. You won't have where to eat. So of course you can save your house from burning down. But I paskin like the Chachamim, and therefore you may not extinguish fire only for financial reasons. Next, now we're moving on to the Isur Midrabanan of taking medicines. Now, one of the common medicinal activities, where's our doctor, that they did in the times of Chazal, is that they used to put some sort of paste around one's eyes. People also used to wear this blue makeup. That was something else. But there was a certain type of chechoil, a certain type of eye paste that also enhanced your eyes, but they were applied around the eye or in the eye to heal it from all types of infections that one might have had. Can you put such a paste on Yom Tov? And here again, the Gemara wants to say, hey, if there is some sort of danger and we view any ailment in the eye, we very easily that this can be a life-threatening ailment. And look at all of the issues here. If you have rira, if there's a certain discharge, then no problem. Or if there's ditza, if it's prickling, or dama, there's some sort of blood or it's bloodshot. Demasa, if you are tearing excessively, or kadach, that's burning, fever. So there, or the beginning of any disease. Oh, Kevin found the picture, amazing. Then let me boily. Then there's no, for sure, you can put it on, not only on Yom Tov, put it on Shabbos. Wow. Shani. Mamash, we consider any ailment in the eye as a potential life-threatening. It doesn't have to be life-threatening. Cut it out. Nip it in the bud. Put on the paste.
Is this preventive or this is for an active?
Very good, Tanach. Very good, very good. This is not preventive. This is someone who's beginning in the illness. It's when the illness begins, you have to nip it in the bud. That's the lenka, right? Right away, take medication. Why? Because then you don't allow it to get worse. Then you're allowed to do it even on Shabbos. It's at the end of the illness. It's at the end of the illness, and therefore you know that you're getting better. You are on the way of getting better, but this will make it quicker better. This is going to clear the eye out even better. Right? You are only improving something which is already good. So Amalei, who is this? This Amemar, right? That Amemar tells Ravashi that it's asur. Frekt Ravashi against Amemar. It says in a Beitzah, again, quoting the same Beitzah. In other words, if you can remove fire to improve food, so what if the food will be a little bit burnt? To improve food that you can do. What you can't. And to improve your vision, what your vision is lesser yichus than your food. So again, he answered, and you're right. Everyone is quoting this Beitzah, but this is all predicated on machshirei oichel nefesh. It's amazing, and we are considering this like a machshir. That Beitzah is kiddushaninun. We don't paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. We may not take out a log of wood in order to prevent the house of smoking up. If there's no danger involved, then on Yom Tov equal to Shabbos, you have the rabbinic prohibition of taking medication because of shchika samamonot.
So according to Rabbi Yehuda, you can do any malacha.
According to Rabbi Yehuda, you can't do any malacha. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you can even do machshirei oichel nefesh. You have to know what falls into that category. First, the last narrow line. Ameimar shari lemichal eina minachri b'shabso. However, asking a goy to do something for you, a goy is allowed to apply this eye paste for you even on Shabbos. Now, Ikeda Amri, Ameimer didn't only say to others what they may do. Ameimer Gufei Kachaleina Menachem, he did it himself. He had a goy put on paste. Again, in the scenario where he's getting better already, it's at the end of the illness, you're only doing it to make it even better, even quicker. You are allowed to do it through a goy. Amalei Ravashi Lameimer, my daito. Why do you think that's allowed? Because the Amar Ula that called Tzarchi Chaylo Oisem Ali De Nachri B'Shabbos Mistama, because you're telling me that the whole problem of Amira La'akum, which is a very serious problem, it's only of a rabbinic nature, and there are exceptions. One exception will be for Tzarchi Chaylo, it needs for the people that are ill. The Amar Rav Amnuna called Davar She'em B'Sakanon Oimer L'Nachri B'Oisem. Even something that won't bring about a danger, like in our case, you are at the end of the illness, you can still tell a guy to do it. But I have a problem. All of the above is only it's only if you're not helping the guy is doing it 100% for you. Problem is that when you apply paste around the eye, you have to open the eye, you have to close the eye, you have to squint the eye. So that movement, isn't that called a shiur? Aren't you helping him? But you, master, come and say, yeah, you're helping the guy because the comments, you close the eye, upasach, and you open the eye. So why is it allowed through a guy? So Amalei, that Ika, Rab Zvid, the koi kavasach, there is a Rab Zvid that holds like you, that helping is prohibited, but the Shani Yelei, and the Shani Yelei, but I told him, I rebut that Misayeya, this type of helping, this guy is garnished. Aim by mamish, it's insignificant halachically, since the guy can apply medicine on me, even though I'm opening my eyes and closing my eyes, it's not a problem. Next, Ameimar Shara Lemikhal Eina B'Yomtiv Sheni Shal Rosh Hashanah. Not even through a goy. Here's big. He allowed for you to apply this type of medicine on the second day Rosh Hashanah. And here, now we have to quickly chazer what we learned before. Amalei Rav Ashila Ameimar Wopa. Second day Rosh Hashanah should not be like second day Yom Tov. Only for burying the dead do we say that. Well, Amar Rava Meis Yom Tov Rishon. Even though it's so important to give kavod and to bury ASAP, we are allowed to bury through a goy. The last line, Yisaska Bayamamit. If someone, God forbid, passes away on the second day Yom Tov, or according to others, if they passed away before, and therefore, if they won't be interred, there's going to be a terrible odor. Now that it's on the second day, even Yidden can do it directly. And not only were we so lenient when it comes to burials, but only for this halacha that we treat the second day Rosh Hashanah like the second day Yom Tov, lekula, only regarding burial, Beitzah, as we learned in the first chapter, that as far as can you have an egg that was born on the first day Rosh Hashanah, can you eat that on the second day? We learned no. On the second day Yom Tov, yes. On the second day Rosh Hashanah, no, because we view Rosh Hashanah like Kedusha Achas. So I get it if you're telling me that this type of medicinal application on the second day Yom Tov is allowed, but we should not allow it on the second day Rosh Hashanah. So Amalei, I hold, we learned that a Shita, the very lenient opinion like the Nardoi, they disagree that Rosh Hashanah is called Kedusha Achas, that they hold that Af Beitzah is also allowed. If an egg was laid on the first day, you are allowed to consume it on the second day, and it's not muktzah. And why is that? My daitoch, why would you think that Rosh Hashanah is different? Because maybe the second day Rosh Hashanah is really the first day Rosh Hashanah. How would that be? Because the month of Elul didn't have 29 days, it really had 30 days. So what we called first day Rosh Hashanah was really Elul, which means the second day Rosh Hashanah is really Yom Tov. That's why. But we know it never happened. We never found that Elul was Mu'ubar. The second day Rosh Hashanah, like nowadays, it's Beis Tishrei. It's not really Yom Tov. He considers that Shtei Kedusha. This goes back to the topic we had in the first chapter, and that's why he was lenient regarding taking medication on the second day Rosh Hashanah. Bottom line is that what we do learn is the second day Yom Tov, whether you include Rosh Hashanah or not, whenever there was some sort of illness, there was an illness. Even though the illness is on the way out, whether you'll take the medicine or not, you're going to get out of Refuah Shalema. But you want to speed up the Refuah Shalema, yes, you are allowed to take medicine. That's what we're learning here in the Gemara. Okay. Next, the third case in the Mishnah was, let's get moving. The ein oifen piten geritzen. You can't bake thick breads on Yom Tov. That was a chumrah of Rabbi Gamliel. Ella the can only wafers, meaning only thin breads. Now we're going to have the Gemara Bavli, and again, I hope that we're going to quote how the Gemara Yerushalmi explains. Tana Rabbanim we learned in a Brais, and that will clarify our Mishnah. Beishamai oimrim ein oifen pas of a Pesach. Pesach. Now sometimes Pesach happens to be the topic that they were discussing, and it can refer to all Yom Tovim. But the Havamina here is that no, there's something unique about Pesach, and if it's only unique about Pesach, it must be chametz related, and it would make sense that the thicker the dough, the greater the small chance that it will not be fully baked, and therefore it's going to become chametz. Because once you knead the flour and the dough together, once you finish the product, it's never going to become chametz. But they understood. Shammai says that don't bake a very thick bread on Pesach. Again, the Havamina is because it might become chametz, and Beis Hillel allows. And now the Kama Passover, we're speaking li Beis Hillel. Even Beis Hillel will have to agree that there is a certain point that the bread is so thick that maybe it's not going to get fully baked. So Amar Afuna, I'll tell you what Beis Hillel allows, even if it is the height, the thickness of one tefah, of a handbreadth. And why is he lenient? Because she came upon him every week, guys, the lechem upon him, like almost everything else in the holy temple, was not chametz, was not allowed to be chametz. I know we use the word lechem. So what? We say hamoitzi lechem in haaretz on matzah also. It was thick a tefach and it was not chametz. So therefore, Beis Hillel says everyone can make a tefach thick bread matzah. Imagine a tefach thick. Today the big yichas, right, Danny? These skinny matzahs. There the yichus was a nice thick piece of matzah. Mask of Rabbi Yosef.
Rabbi, is this rule of Rabbi Gamliel specific to Pesach, where you can't bake it, or
No. Wait, Danny. So wait. We're in middle. In other words, we're trying to clarify what Rabbi Gamliel says. The Gemara bringing down Pesach according to the Havamina. We're going to change that. It's only Pesach related. But wait. So Mask of Rabbi Yosef, that's not pshat in this Beitzah. It's not a chametz issue at all. It can't be, because if that's the case, Beis Hillel can never bring a proof from the lechem apanim. How can you compare? Im amiru b'zrizin, Kohanim were so diligent. They made sure that everything is done properly. Yomiru, everyone makes matzah. Yeah, and they think they're making a big mitzvah. They're making matzah out of Pesach. You understand? The she'enan's reason they don't know what they're doing. Im amiru b'pasa meila. We learned in Menachos that all of the flour that was used and all of the flour offerings, they were pounded 300 times. In other words, the quality of the flour was amazing. And one of the upsides of using a greater quality flour is that it mixes with the water better, and there's a much lesser chance that it won't be baked. So that's in the Beis Hamikdash called Pasamela, but the Yom Pasha Eina Mela. No. Furthermore, in the Holy Temple, the wood was so dry, Valdik wood fire. Anyone can bake for Pesach in your own oven. Who says? Im Amru b'tanur cham in the Beis Hamikdash, the oven was already very hot. The last narrow line. Yomru b'tamar tzoinon. Im Amru b'tanur shel mateches in the Beis Hamikdash, guys, we learned there needed to be metal ovens. Yomru b'tamar shel cheres. Okay, so therefore, no, Beis Hillel does not allow on Pesach for you to make tefach thick matzahs. That's out of the question. So I asked my teacher in private, and who was the teacher of Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba? Like parentheses, Umanu Rav. What's pas Abba? What are they speaking about? You didn't understand pshat on this Beitzah. They're speaking about pas meruba. It wasn't about Pesach. They just mentioned Pesach. Pas Abba means, can you make many breads, even more than what you will need on Yom Tov? That's the question. And that we learned above. Why would you, in other words, you forget about the Erev Tavshelim. You can't make something on Yom Tov for a weekday. So we did learn a svara that if you pack up the oven, then everything comes out better. And that was a heter to pack up the oven. That's the machlokes tanoim. What Beis Hillel says that even if you're making many breads, and you know you don't need all of them today, since the quality of each one is bettered by the fact that the oven was fuller, you can make all of it. You can make the whole dough. And Beis Shammai disagrees. Now, according to this, Danny, that's the meaning of our Mishnah. The problem is rekikin. Rekikin means wafers. Means I'll get back to the rekikin in a moment. That she'iltis es Rebbe b'yichud. I asked my teacher in private to explain to me this Beitzah. And here, the other version is that his teacher is not Rav, but his teacher is Rav's teacher. Umanu Rabbeinu HaKadosh. My pas ava, and Rebbe explained that the meaning of this Beitzah is regarding pas meruba. Can you make many breads on Yom Tov, knowing that you will not eat all of them on Yom Tov? Why do we call it thick? So the Gemara said, I'll tell you why, because to make many breads, the dough has to be thick. It's a lot of dough. Or inami ba'asli, the haitana, the pasha, the way they worded a lot was by using the word thick. Pas menuba, pas avokado. In other words, michti fragt the Gemara, if that's the case, why does it say Pesach? The whole issue is because you may not trouble yourself on Yom Tov for non-Yom Tov needs. So my idea Pesach and a chanami, says the Gemara. Afilu b'shar Yom Tov nami question mark, answers the Gemara in a chanami. The Tana b'Yom Tov the Pesach koi. The Pasha, they were speaking about Pesach, so they applied it to Pesach. Tanya nami hachi b'shamay oimrim ein oifen pas meruba b'Yom Tov, and here the word is not ava but meruba, and Beis Hillel are matir. Now, guys, what's beautiful is that in the Yerushalmi, he writes different. He teaches the Yerushalmi, teaches the Mishnah the way it says. The reason why Beis Shammai holds that you may not make thick breads, dafka small breads, connected to this, is because it's difficult to make thin breads. That's why you pay more money for the thin matzahs. It's harder. And when you do something that's harder, you do less of it. It's based on the concept that because of Tircha Yeseda, we want to make sure that what you bake on Yom Tov will be only for Yom Tov. So Beis Shammai therefore said, make a type of bread that's difficult for you to make, not the thicker bread that even I can make. Make the thin bread. It's hard to make it. You'll make less of it. That's Keilu a geder, a guarantee that you won't make it for beyond Yom Tov. Interesting how it fits mamish better with the words of the Mishnah. Okay. Now we're moving on to the new Mishnah. This is a hemshech. So Rabban Gamliel, beyond the letter of the law, in three things in Yom Tov, he was Kedivrei Beis Shammai, and now the Mishnah says, Af hu Rabban Gamliel, Amar Shloisha Devarim Lo Hakel. In three other areas, he was lenient. Number one, Mechabdin Beis Hamitois, that on Yom Tov you are allowed to sweep. I know the word mita means a bed, but they would eat reclining in a bed. Beis Hamitois means in the dining room, which is an area that there would be a certain amount of crumbs and other residue of food. And we know we learned in Shabbos, not on the floors today. Today it's much better. But then sweeping a floor might fill up a crevice. You'll be mashva gumais. And if there is a hole or an indentation in the floor that you fixed, that's problematic in the malach of baina, even though you're not building a building. So maybe you might affect baina. Here, he allowed on Yom Tov for people to sweep the floors. That's one leniency. Number two is umanichem es hamugmar b'Yom Tov. We are allowed to place incense on burning coals on Yom Tov. We'll see in the Gemara for what? They would place incense to perfume garments. They would place incense just to perfume the environment. We'll see what is permitted. And number three, he was lenient that v'oisin gedi mekulas belele psachim. So we had this on Masechtas Psachim in the times of the Beis Hamikdash when we have a mizbeach. So the way our animals were prepared for the Korban Pesach is that they would roast the entire animal at one time, and even the legs that was cut off and other inner parts of the animals called the entrails, they were put on the side of the body of the lamb, and they would all roast it together. And they would call that a armed lamb because it's like a soldier that has a weapon on his side. So there was a lamb, and all of the parts that they cut out, they put on the side. That was the unique way, based on a pasuk, Roshai al kirboy, the al karav, or al karav al kirboy. And the question is one allowed? Is one allowed to do that? Not in the Beis Hamikdash. Do we say that it looks like you're bringing kachim outside the Beis Hamikdash, or in reverse? Zecher lemigdash is to prepare the meat, b'diyuk, the way they prepared it. So Rabbi Gamliel was lenient that he allowed for people to prepare the meat that they're going to have in the Seder, Belelli psachim, and the chachamim are oisrin, and they are aser to sweep because you might be mashva gumais. They asered this mugmar because, as we will see, there's a certain type of perfume that's not shavel l'chol nefesh. And the problem of mugmar is that when you put incense on coals, you're doing two problems. You are lighting the incense and you are extinguishing a little bit of coals. You can do it for something that most people do. The type of perfuming that the Mishnah is talking about is something that only the very gross of fancy big window people do. The commoners did not do it, and therefore not shavel l'chol nefesh. There is no heter to do it on Yom Tov. And the third issue is whether we're going to say that it looks like you're bringing kachim achutz. We all know how careful we are in Chabad, that even the zroya, right, we take it from the neck or the pupik of the chicken, and we take off almost all the meat. It should be the furthest possible from basar, because we don't want it to give the smallest appearance, even though it's zecher, but it should only be a zecher, and it should not look like kachim itself. Okay, and we
what
also...
about Rabban Gamliel? He doesn't have a problem with mashva gumos? It's like mamish...
He doesn't have a problem because if you know for sure that you're going to be doing it is one thing, and this is going to lead us into the topic shleima of davar she'ein neschaven. Davar she'ein neschaven and machlekes that Rabbi Yehuda holds it's aser midrabanan. Clearly, we're going to see this in the next sugya that he paskin like Rab Shimon, and on Yom Tov he was making. Let's go. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Asi, that let's focus on the second din of whether you are allowed to place incense on coals. It's called mugmar, says Rav Asi, at least the initial understanding of Rav Asi, that their machloikis in our Mishnah is only legamer, it is only regarding incense that's burnt to perfume garments. So they would place the garments a little bit above these coals, and the shmekach would go into your garments. But if you're only putting incense on the coals to give a pleasant fragrance in the room, that divrei hakol mutar, that you are allowed to do. That you're allowed to do. It's something that shavel l'chol nefesh. It's to do with shavel l'chol nefesh, not shavel l'chol nefesh. Only the fancy people would perfume up their clothing, and the commoner peoples never put perfume in their clothing by having incense smoke into the clothing. So if it's not shavel l'chol nefesh, even using metoich doesn't help. That's something that may not be done on Yom Tov. Okay, fragt the Gemara against this first understanding of Rav Asi. It says in a Beitzah, you may not sweep your dining room, which normally you would want to sweep it because people eat there. You may not do it on Yom Tov. However, they were lenient and they were mechabdin. I want you to know that I disagree with that. No, many times I had the merit to go with my father, which is Reb Tzaddik, and I went into the house of Rabban Gamliel, and what I witnessed there was they never swept their floors. What they used to do is they would sweep it before Yom Tov, and the person and they would spread sheets on the floor. The Hungarians that they put this plastic stuff on their couches. In other words, before Yom Tov, they would cover their floors. So when you walked on the floors, garnished, no schmutz happened. And in the next day, when the guests came, your kids will suffer. But when the guests, for the archim, then they would remove the sheets, and it would look like the house was just swept up. So don't tell me Rabbi Gamliel was lenient. No, they told Rabbi Elazar ben Abtzadik that what you saw, we're not debating with what you saw. But Im Kain after Shabbos Musalasas came. We know there is a machlokes. Don't tell me that this was the only solution. If this is the only thing that they did, then you can even do it before Shabbos. You can cover your floors with sadinim and remove it on Shabbos. So since there is a machlokes, it must be that Rabbi Gamliel actually, if needed, allowed you to sweep the floors itself. Number two, all in the Beitzah. And guys, don't forget that Rav Asi is the one that said that their argument was regarding legamer, that means putting the scent in garments and not concerning just giving in the environment a good fragrance. And here again, Amar Elazar ben Abtzadik, he says they don't argue. And I never saw them do that. I actually saw that they did not allow it. You know what they allowed? Something else. They would have, prior to Yom Tov, they would have these types of perforated utensils. And before Yom Tov, you would smoke it up. It would be filled with smoke. And then they would plug it up. All the smoke, all of the perfume smoke would be stuck in it. The next day, when guests would come into the house, they would open up, they would unplug it, and we're not speaking about garments, we're speaking about creating a good fragrance in the room, and the nimsabayis, misgamer, and the whole house was filled with a good scent. So Amrullah here again, they tell Rabbi Elazar ben Abtzadik, if this is the only thing that they would allow, then they're not arguing, because that's something that you can do even prior to Shabbos. Just unplugging a keli that is filled with smoke is something mutar. After Shabbos, mutar last came. So in other words, no, the machlokes is whether you can create a perfumed environment. Ooh, he got a problem, because the Amrullah is that what were they speaking about? Perfuming the environment, not garments, and it is regarding perfuming the environment that there is a machlokes, the opposite of Rav Asi. And indeed, we amend what Rav Asi said. Amar Rav Asi, guys, 4 or 5 lines from the bottom, the machlokes is only lariach, burning incense to create a fragrant smell in their environment. That's the machlokes. Rav Gamliel is lenient. However, legamer, to perfume garments, that's completely asur. That is not allowed. Very good. And now let's start the new sugya by Elyahu, 3 lines from the bottom. Ma'u la'ashen. What's la'ashen? Are you allowed to smoke? What are we talking about? Says Rashi, 5 lines from the bottom. Can you smoke fruits with psamim for the fruits to absorb the fragrance? Can you do that on Yom Tov? Now, nefesh. 1 second. So let's look in the Gemara. Keep your finger in Rashi. Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba says asur. Amar Rav asur. Shmuel says muter. What's the machlokes? Look inside Rashi. Asur, because the tifnoik yeseiruhu, This is some sort of extravagance. It's an extravagance. It's something who eats that way. You have to smoke your fruits. That's something that's not shavuot l'chol nefesh. Only the very finicky, hoicha fenced people do that. And Shmuel says a gavaldik isfarim. Shmuel knows that de facto, only the very wealthy people do it. But you know why only the very wealthy people do it? Because the poor people can't afford to do it. If you would give them money, they would do it right away. Look inside Rashi, 3 lines from the bottom. Shmuel says mutter because this is mamish oichel nefesh. V'ro'oi af la'aniyim. Elo she'eino mosel lehem. He gives a great example. Who eats deer? Only the very wealthy. So okay, what? So you can't shecht a deer on Yom Tov because it's not shavuot l'chol nefesh? No, everyone would eat deer. They just can't afford it. There are certain behaviors that if the person was not accustomed to it, even if they would win the lottery, they wouldn't do it right away. That's called not shavuot l'chol nefesh. But something that you would do right away, you just can't afford it, that's called shavuot l'chol nefesh. So therefore, smoking fruits is something that you are allowed to do. Let's go in the Gemara Vayter. Rafuna Omar. Now Rafuna explains what would be the issue. 2 lines before the bottom, and that goes to our entire topic. What's the issue with putting on incense to perfume garments or to make a fragrant environment? Rafuna says, you know why there's a problem? Because you're MERCAVA. Because when you put the incense on the coals, those coals are extinguished. Amalei Rav Nachman, why don't you also say because you're mavid, you're kindling, you're burning the spices? And a chanami, I meant you're doing both. Amalei Rafuna says, at the first moment you're putting out the coals, and then you end up kindling the incense, so you have 2 violations. Amar Rav Yehuda al gabi gachelos asur, that the problem is putting it on a coal, which is like a burning, daf chav gimel, aval gabi cheres. But if you have a earthen shard that was very hot, but when you put incense on it, you're not extinguishing anything, then you are allowed to do it. Now hold on. Whoa, extinguishing, I get. But what about kindling? I'm kindling because the cheres is going to burn up the incense. So Rashi says, mutar the kibui leka. But what about havara, the top Rashi? Since it's through a shinoi, wow. It's like la'achayad. And guys, we're speaking about Yom Tov. It's very important as a rule. There are exceptions. That something, la'achayad, which takes it down on Shabbos from a biblical to a rabbinical, it's only midrabanan. On Yom Tov, it's mutter. Here he held it's mutter. Because la'achayad. Now, Rabba says, we'll conclude with this, even putting these spices on top of a very hot piece of earthenware is also prohibited. Not because of extinguishing, you're not extinguishing anything. Not because of your kindling. Kindling kila'achayad is allowed on Yom Tov. But now we're introducing a new thing. Mishum de komoylid recha. Because you're producing in the earthenware. You're putting in the earthenware a fragrance that it never had before. Let's read inside the second Rashi, the second line from the top. Shenichnas becheres shelo yehoya bo yireach va'asur midrabanan, not noilad. Don't confuse this with noilad. Noilad is muksa. We're speaking about doing something that's creating something new. Shahamoiled davar chadash karifu la'oiseh melacha chadash. It's like doing a new malacha, and it's a rabbinic prohibition. So therefore, whenever you're not allowed to do it, there's no heter by doing it al cheres. It will never be allowed. A lot more, God willing, to be continued. Wow, every daf is
great daf.
Mamish gepackt with all this dinner.
Thank you, Rabbi. Good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos.